Back, guys. Our next speaker is Charles Kravetz, and he is going to be talking about accessibility in software, which I think is a really important topic, and I'm really glad that we have a speaker on this. So without further ado, Charles.
Thank you very much, Phil. I'm Charlie Kravetz, and I retired from the Air Force in 1992 after 20 years. Once I retired, I decided to become a plumber. I mean, why not, right? I loaded bombs in the Air Force. I may as well fix pipes now. Well, in Idaho, to become a plumber, you are required to go to a plumbing school for 4 years. You must be an apprentice to a licensed contractor for 4 years, and you have to have 4 years, 40-hour weeks. If you don't get all your work time in, you get to extend your apprenticeship. So I did all that, and I got my license. And after a few months of having my license, my boss started questioning me. He says, "How come you're dropping all your tools?" I carry a pipe wrench around, and before you know it, bang, it's on the floor. I'd pick up his 15-pound, $350 drill and drop it. And it didn't matter if it's wood or concrete, it's going down. And I dropped it from the ceiling. And it hit the floor 2 stories down. He was not happy with me. Come to find out, in 2000, I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. Multiple sclerosis is a wonderful disease to have. It mimics every other disease on the planet. When anything happens, they cannot tell if it's multiple sclerosis until they rule everything else out. To go with that, I went blind in 1995. I wear glasses. I'm blind. I can't see the back of the room right now. I went blind. I was 2 1200s corrected vision. For those who don't know, that means I saw at 2 feet what you see at 4 football fields away. Okay? My vision came back, and some of my strength came back, but not all of it. And I figured I'm now qualified to talk about accessibility. And what makes me so qualified is the multiple sclerosis. At various times in the last 10 years, I have lost the use of my legs. Yes, I gave my cane up 18 months ago. I have a walker in the house because I had to have one for several months. There was a point where they were ordering a wheelchair for me. My left arm went numb for over 2 years. When I finally got the left arm back, the right arm decided not to work. That went on for over a year. I also lost my capability to talk for several months after one of my attacks. So, you know, when you put all that together, I know a little bit. So often today, we think of accessibility, and our developers say, hey, you know, we got it. We got screen readers for you. We got on-screen keyboards for you. We got hardware you can use that's just going to work like nothing else. Try it. Just try it. I dare any one of you to go home, shut off your monitor, and install GNOME Orca, which is the best screen reader we have. That's what the blind guy does. He can't see his screen. He's got to install that somehow. And no, you're not going to be able to. I'll guarantee it. Your computer won't talk to you. They bring up Stephen Hawking. Hey, Stephen can talk, right? We all know he can talk. He's the most famous physicist on Earth, and he has hardware and software that lets him speak by moving one cheek muscle. This is fantastic. Any one of us should be able to get that, right? No. $70,000 with donated hardware and software lets him talk. He also has his 24-hour, 7-day-a-week repair team that's donated. His software is fantastic. Intel in December stated they're going to release the software to open source. Yay! I want it! Think of the people I can help with that. Well, they're going to release it in January. But it ain't there yet. They haven't released it. Even when they do release it, and we're watching, I have alerts out for it. SwiftKey donates 50% of his software. And they are not releasing it. They have stated they will not release it, period. If you want it, you pay. And you pay big. So once Intel releases their half of the software, we're going to get developers working it because it's no good to us. We can't use it the way it is. It has to be worked on and incorporated into our applications for it to work now, because we can't take what they're giving us and use it. That ain't going to happen. I talked about a screen reader, GNOME Orca. GNOME Orca is an excellent screen reader for anyone visually disabled. However, the visually disabled can't install Orca. It works fantastic. It talks to them. It reads the entire computer screen. It don't care what's on there. It talks really nice if you tune it. If you install GNOME Orca on your computer right now, you'll find you can't understand a word it says. It talks at the rate of 150 to 170 words per minute, which is normal speech. But it talks in a voice you're not used to. And it will be somewhat robotic. You have to slow it down to at least 70 words a minute to understand it. Once you tune your ears to that, you'll be able to increase it and use it. And yes, I know a developer that uses it, and he hears about 250 words a minute. It works for him. But he's a developer, and he knows what he's doing. I have used it. If you go to my website and take a look, you will find I wrote out how to install GNOME Orca using Debian testing with XFCE desktop environment. It only took me 3 days, but it worked. No, I don't suggest the normal person do it. If you're not really good at software, you're going to find you broke your computer and you can't fix it. It'll crash, I'll guarantee it. However, it's good software. We like it. We've got on-screen keyboards for the handicapped. Anybody try to type with their hand this way? I have. I've also had to type with my hand this way because it wouldn't come out of a cramp. When you got to type with your fingers not working or your arm not working, you can't use a hardware keyboard. The keys don't work good. Instead, you find an on-screen keyboard to use. And I really appreciate GNOME's hard work on accessibility. They have tried really hard to get stuff working for us. And they did it under GNOME 2. Caribou is GNOME's latest on-screen keyboard. Caribou has minor problems. And I got to read this because I want it right. Caribou only works in GNOME 3, which is GTK 3. According to the website, this is an early release intended for people to preview the UI interaction. Caribou is not currently usable as a primary text input application. I just told you you could use it, right? Forget it. It won't work. Prior to Caribou, we had GNOME on-screen keyboard, GOC. GOC was great. We could use it in almost any environment. I used it with KDE. I used it with XFCE. I used it in GNOME. It was fantastic. It worked. GOC is GTK2 and no longer works in GTK3. If you look in Debian's repositories, you will not find it. If you go to the GNOME website, you will find a note. The information on this page is partially outdated. GNOME 3's Caribou has effectively replaced GNOME 2's GOC. You gotta be kidding me! What are you gonna use? Neither one of them, I'll guarantee it. Install Florence. Florence is a wonderful virtual keyboard. Once you install it and you run it, you will see a keyboard on your screen similar to what you have on your smartphones and tablets. Using your input device, be it a mouse, a stick, a pencil. Yes, we use pencils sometimes because we can hold them in our mouth and hit the keys. A trackball. You tap each key, it will type. It's a little slow, but it works. And if you're disabled, nobody cares if you're slow. Sometimes they'll just go ahead and hold the conversation without you because you're still typing the sentence saying, "Here I am," because you can't type fast enough, but that's okay. You'll catch up. KBD on-screen keyboard is for KDE, and it does work. KDE has done some real hard work to catch up in accessibility. They are trying to port Orca, or maybe they have now, to Qt, which allows it to run under KDE and GNOME and XFCE. That software works. We have the onboard on-screen keyboard in Ubuntu. That also works. Ubuntu has tried pretty hard to bring accessibility to the front. They are one of the few distributions that you can hand a blind person the CD and say, "Install this." If you hit any key within 12 seconds, it starts Orca. And it allows that visually disabled person to install Ubuntu on their computer. Another really good on-screen keyboard is called Dasher. Has anyone seen Dasher in use? Dasher is probably the best on-screen keyboard in open source. It works under any desktop environment, including Windows and iOS. The developers are wonderful to work with. They have worked really hard to make Dasher the best on-screen keyboard out there. The learning curve is extreme. Let me show you something. Yes, I know I'm interrupting the slideshow. That's life in the fast lane today. All right, let me bring up a terminal. And bring up Dasher. I use Dasher because Dasher works. Okay, I'm not very good at this with this bloody touchpad because my fingers don't work on a touchpad. This is an on-screen keyboard. Believe it or not. Okay, I'm going to push this over here, and I'm going to grab my trackball and plug it in because this makes it so much easier for me. And we're going to show you guys Dasher. Don't be scared of it. It's going to be one of the hardest programs you're ever going to try to learn. But it works. Okay. No, get up there. Get back there. Thank you. I'm doing this in a terminal because in a terminal, I know the terminal accepts the input from Dasher without any questions. Okay? Now, watch this. Click in my terminal, click on Dasher.
Oh, wow.
This is, yes, it will throw you if you're not used to it. Using this on-screen keyboard, I brought up direct, I didn't bring up direct mode. I can type 30 to 35 words a minute, which, when we're talking accessibility, 30 to 35 words a minute is fast. You notice I have capital letters, I have small letters, I have speed when I need it. Okay, this is...
You're clicking in there,
I'm clicking nothing, I am pointing.
Okay.
The only time I click is to start or stop it.
Okay.
What you see my cursor doing over on the right side of the screen is exactly what you have to do to use Dasher. Yes, it takes time to learn it. Yes, it's a very high learning curve. But hey, for the disabled, we don't care what the learning curves are. Ask any developer. He'll tell you, go get a program that works. These work. We default to the normal-bodied person. We don't want them to work too hard learning anything. They don't have any handicaps. Why should they have to fight to make things work? Okay, that's my favorite on-screen keyboard. This is Florence. Nothing but a touchpad. You can type anything you want in it. Okay? These programs work. We work harder to make them work. Because we're handicapped. Because there are no defaults that say make it easy on the handicapped. The default is make it easy on the normal, able-bodied person. Right? Nobody wants to think that the handicapped might use it. Okay, you got any questions so far? Linux is a Linux distribution for the visually impaired and blind. Linux was developed by a blind developer specifically for the visually disabled. It is a distribution that starts right off with Orca. It has screen magnification in it. It has talking all the way through it. And it's available free. I've worked with the developers that developed it. It's good. They don't make a lot of changes to it. And no, you don't get to pick your desktop environment. You're going to use GNOME. We got to use what we got to use. If you're disabled, you don't get to pick the software you want. You get to pick the software that you can use. We like choices, though, you know. We'd really like to have a choice like everyone else. We'd like to be able to stand up there and say, hey, I use Fedora, and it works for me, but I can't see the screens. Hey, I use Arch Linux with XFCE, and it works, but I can't see the screens, or I can't hear the sounds, or I can't hit the keyboard. We can't do that. If we're disabled, we use what we have to use because there's only one or two applications going to work. We don't get a choice. If you're installing Linux on your computers, you should have no problem with it. I've never seen the installer on this stick any time. It's never crashed on me. I've put it on new computers and I've put it on old computers. And when I talk old computers, I have a computer sitting there running right now with a 14-year-old motherboard. And yes, Linux will work. Linux is nice. We do a lot with text-to-speech software. Text-to-speech is very good when you need it. We have eSpeak. The voice is robotic. You have to type it in to the computer and tell it what to say, but it works. You have Festival. Festival is an old program. Works well with Orca. Works on its own too. We have Kepstrel. Kepstrel is new. It works, but you got to fiddle with it. I have a friend of mine who had to make a decision a few months back whether or not to have his larynx removed. I know a lot about accessibility programs. I've worked with a lot of accessibility programs. I spent 18 months as a Ubuntu project lead. I rewrote the Ubuntu accessibility wiki, and I used to do all their testing for accessibility. So when Ken Starks needed to find a program to go text-to-speech, they sent him to me. Yeah, Ken, eSpeak works great. I tried that, and it doesn't work that great for me. It's a really bad-sounding voice. Well, Ken, try Festival. Well, I did, but I can't figure out how to type it into the terminal even. It's a disability program. That means it's got a high learning curve. You don't get to just pick it up and use it. It's not like everybody else's programs. Am I right? Handicapped will find a way to use it, but you don't get to just pick it up and use it. It doesn't happen. It's got really high learning curves. When you start Orca, same thing. It's going to be a high learning curve. If you're blind, well, you better have a sighted person help you with the installation on Orca and the setup, because you're not going to be able to do it on your own. Chances are you can't even find the repositories on your own, so you probably got a sighted person sitting there anyway. Well, after we went through those three, we're now looking into Android for Ken. Ken is the executive director of a charity called Reglue, previously known as Helios. They give computers with Linux on them to underprivileged and poor children in the Austin, Texas area. We're hoping he can continue his work, but he can't walk into anyone's house right now and set up a computer for a kid if he can't tell him what to do. He had his larynx removed last month. Temporarily, one of the Android text-to-speech programs is working. But again, you don't just jump into accessibility programs and use them. It doesn't work. None of us can do that. Along the same lines, I have a sister with trigeminal neuralgia. Trigeminal neuralgia is a disease of the nervous system in the brain. Coming up the back of your neck, you have a nerve that as it comes up, it hits the back of the ear and it splits into three nerves. One over the top of the ear, one under the ear down the jawline, one down the lower jawline. Trigeminal neuralgia does something that nerve fires continuously. If you ever hit your funny bone on a chair, you fired a nerve. Could you live with that full time? That's not even close. It's like a 1 on a 1 to 10 scale in pain compared to trigeminal neuralgia. My sister describes her pain as if someone took an ice pick and pushed it into her head, and it's just sitting there. Through several brain surgeries, she lost the hearing in one ear. Well, that shouldn't be a problem, right? We got good audio. She bought a new HP computer, and it's a stereo-only output. Do you know stereo comes out of 2 speakers? And it ain't even the same sounds. She can hear half of what's said on her computer. She can't hear the other half because it keeps switching speakers on her. Being the intelligent individual I am, I says, well, Jackie, just go into BIOS and switch it from stereo to mono. You've done that before on computers. You know what I'm talking about. She says, okay. And she goes into the BIOS and come to find out, HP did not put a switch in. You can't turn stereo off. So she's running Microsoft Windows software. Hey, you know, Microsoft's great on accessibility, let me tell you. Some of their programs are a little difficult to use. They've got JAWS for screen reader. They've got all kinds of good stuff. And it's really easy to get to in a control panel, right? You can't turn stereo off. For my sister who's deaf in one ear and has damaged vocal cords, there's nothing in Microsoft that works. I couldn't believe it. How hard is it to put in a software switch that says we're going to switch our stereo off? It can't be that hard. But it's not there because a normal able-bodied person doesn't need it. I mentioned damaged vocal cords. Her hands don't work well. So she bought Dragon Naturally Speaking. Everybody knows that's a great program for text-to-speech, right? Or speech-to-text, rather. She can use her computer now because she can talk to it and it'll type. When you have damaged nerves, you have a really good voice early in the morning. That's when you can train Dragon Naturally Speaking. Given a few hours, your voice goes hoarse. And it starts dropping a lot of words. By night, her voice is gone. And Dragon Naturally Speaking only picks up one voice per person. It won't pick up the changes during the day. No software will. It doesn't matter if you're talking about Microsoft, if you're talking about Apple, if you're talking about Linux. Software does not pick up your voice if it changes through the day. It only picks up a steady voice, a single voice. What are the disabled people? We're really a nice bunch to be around. We're resilient, we're very determined, and we're very independent. We get kind of irritated at the developer that says, go out and fix your computer. Well, I can't see my computer to fix it. Well, then get somebody over there to help you. Why? Who among the able-bodied people calls the neighbor to come over and help them? Anybody? Nobody will. We're just as independent and just as determined. Sometimes it takes us longer to accomplish what everyone else can do really quick. But we will accomplish it somehow. When we talk about the disabled, we're not talking just the blind person. Disabilities include deafness, mute, autism, physical disability, and many others. And we can't fix all of them. There's no way we're ever going to get them all fixed. But because we're pretty determined people, we're going to fix what we can. I belong to a group on Google Plus called Universal Tux. Universal Tux has a single mission: improve accessibility in software. We're a closed community. We don't just allow anyone to come in and join. You've got to ask us. And we're going to check and make sure that you're not going to come in there and just run us in the ground, because we get enough of that without being in a community. Everybody's willing to run us in the ground when we're handicapped. For non-programmers, accessibility programs are really difficult to use. They're really difficult to find. Unless you know the names of them, they're almost impossible to find. And a lot of our programs, you will not simply go into a repository to load. You've got to go find them. Some are on SourceForge, some are on their own websites. But you learn to dig. When it comes to testing the developer's applications, most developers do not know how to test for your disability. Surprisingly, I help them. I have shown many developers how to do tests. It's a simple thing. If you're trying to test for a visual disability, get about a jar of Vaseline and a pair of sunglasses. You smear Vaseline across your sunglasses, you're now visually disabled. If you can't work your program that way, you didn't do it right. And you can't help the disabled. Tie a hand behind your back and use your keyboard. I have special devices I use. And I brought these in specifically. When I talk about using a trackball, this is a trackball. This is a 2-inch ball. I can run this ball with my elbow. These buttons can be hit with an elbow if you have to. You can't do that with a normal mouse. Many of the trackballs out there are 1 inch. And you only have the top surface sticking through. When you try to run that 1-inch trackball with your arm, it doesn't work well. When you try to hit the normal mouse buttons and you ain't got a hand to use, they're almost impossible. Another piece of equipment that I really like, that most people have never heard of, is a vertical mouse. This is a vertical mouse. I purposely brought that in. When I use a vertical mouse, it sits on a table, my hand sits here. Notice my hand is not touching the table. There's a ledge built in to make sure of it. These are very specific to the hand. You get a left hand or a right hand vertical mouse. They run on USB. They're also wireless. I never order wireless. Wireless, for me, is not dependable. I need something that I know is going to work when I touch it. My hand sits on the side of this. The top 2 fingers are on the right and left click. I have a wheel in the middle. The bottom button is back. There's a button on this side where my thumb rests in its own little groove. That button is also a left click button. Unfortunately, on this particular vertical mouse, that left click button doesn't work in Linux. To use this in Windows, you must have the installation CD. They cannot just plug it in, it won't work. I ordered an i1 mechanical keyboard for myself. I paid $150 for it because i1 has a built-in 2-inch trackball. It's beautiful. It's all in one. I got a keyboard, numeric keypad, and a trackball. It's all mechanical. I don't have the strength in my fingers to push the keys. I paid $150 for a keyboard I can't use. All of these items are noted on my website so that the next person that needs them can look on there and say, oh, you got to have a lot of strength to push the keys on this keyboard. Don't order it. Oh, look at this strange-looking mouse. He says it works better than anything else he's ever used. I used that vertical mouse until my right arm went out. When you lose the use of the right arm with a right-handed vertical mouse, you can't use it. You can't switch it to the left hand. It's very much one-handed. Oh, well, back to the trackballs. None of our equipment comes cheap. Both of those are $100 units. But they work. My own dream, to take from Martin Luther King, I do have a dream. I have a dream that someday I am going to be able to sit down at a computer and make the same selection that every able-bodied person today makes. Pick my software because I want to use it, instead of pick my software because that's what works. Hopefully that's going to happen someday. We're doing good on it. When I started in computers, we didn't have any of this stuff. But we can do a lot better on it. We don't have to sit back and wait. Very often in today's world, as developers, you don't touch accessibility until the program's ready to release. You can't shoehorn accessibility in and make it work. That fails. We need developers to build it while they're building their applications. Build the accessibility in for us. That's the only way it really works well. Everything else makes it crash. And yes, I have 10 years testing accessibility software. I can tell you it makes it crash every time you shoehorn it in. It doesn't work well. You can go to Ubuntu's Launchpad and call up accessibility. They have a category for it. In accessibility, you'll see bugs going all the way back to 2006. They shoehorned it in. And they haven't been able to fix the bugs. It doesn't belong there. I went to a WordPress conference 2 years ago. It was great. We all know WordPress works for building websites, right? They had a systems administrator there that did a session. A blind systems administrator. And she stood up there and she says, you know, I was blind through school and it didn't bother me. I was blind through high school, that was fine. I was blind through college, I got my degrees in computer science. I even have all my certificates in Microsoft and Linux both. She says, but as a blind system administrator, I wanted to build my own WordPress website. Guess what? It took her 2 years to find a theme that's accessible for a blind person to build a WordPress website. But she built it. We're determined. We're independent. We're resilient. We'll find a way. Any questions? Go ahead.
I have a question. My father has a problem with the mouse cursor being too small in Ubuntu Linux.
Yes.
Is there a way to make the cursor bigger and to change the color?
Under Unity? I don't think so.
Well, he doesn't use Unity. He uses the classic Adobe.
Yes, there is. There is. Go into System. Can't remember the names now, but yeah, under System, you have your 2 categories listed, I believe. go in there. There is a place for the mouse. And under mouse, he can, and I did this. My cursor was a ½ inch big. You notice I don't use anything tiny on my computers. Another issue that I have dealt with is fonts. When I set up my own computer, that laptop right there, minimum font size, 14. Minimum font size on the internet, 16. When I get to a website, I hit Control plus 5 times. And I started at a 16. You know what that does to your fonts? Every time you report that to a webmaster, he's going to come back and say, what size are you using? You can't use a font that big. That's why it isn't working right. Wait a minute. Why could I hit Control plus? Did you really build that in so I couldn't use it? I got to have fonts I can see. And those are. And yes, they distort things bad. I've reported it through Google. I've reported it through Firefox. I've reported it through Ubuntu. I've reported it to XFCE. Nobody can fix it. Yes. Screen reader Orca, GNOME Orca will work. It takes some fiddling. What desktop environment are you using? Ubuntu? You should have the Orca screen reader in the repository. It may be listed under GNOME Orca or what's the other word? Search Orca in your repositories. It should be there. Yes?
As a developer, if you're not disabled and you don't know all these tricks, is there guidelines for developers to be able to develop more accessible stuff in the environment?
Yes, there is. And any developer that wants to get his program working skips them. That's one of the problems we run into. The guidelines are there, yes. For 5 years, I fought Mark Shuttleworth in Ubuntu even. Because Mark is wonderful. Don't get me wrong now. Mark is wonderful. He has done something really fantastic with Ubuntu. And yes, he financed the whole thing on his own. But every time we brought accessibility up, Mark would say, yes, we're going to have that in the next release. And as soon as that release was ready to go, he says, okay, now go put the accessibility in. We got 24 hours. If it took you 6 months to build your release, how do you think we're going to put accessibility in there in 24 hours? It ain't going to happen. That's why we need it built in as it goes. We can't shoehorn the applications. That's failing. Yes?
Kind of a small niche question, but what's the what is it about the ledge on the vertical mouse that why is the ledge necessary?
When you use a vertical mouse, your vertical mouse is sitting on the desktop. If your hand is sitting here and you're running that around the desktop, your hand gets really sore rubbing against that desktop. With the ledge built in, your hand stays off the desk. Well, that's all I have. We can break early. I want to thank you all for coming. And if you've got any more questions, Anybody got more questions? Feel free to seek me out. I'm here.
I had a question. Do
Yep.
you ever use a monocular to look at the screen? A monocular, you know?
No, I haven't.
That's what I do. I'm a software developer too, but I use a monocular to look at the screen.
And it works?
It works only because I have a narrow field of vision and screen
Yeah.
readers don't work for me.
I can understand that.
My friend I was telling you about,
Yeah.
he used one a lot. That's how he could work.
Screen magnifiers are fantastic, but they don't work well for any of us. That's where he's talking a monocular. He gets to magnify the screen for himself. He is not putting something. If you've never used a screen magnifier and you're a developer, please try it.
Is a screen magnifier going to help for a developer? Like the screen larger, is that going to help?
No.
Or
Your screen magnifier, my blind developer used one, but he also used a 32-inch screen. Okay? Most screen magnifiers, when you put them up there, it's like looking through a magnifying glass.
yeah.
It can be useful, but it's not what it's cracked up to be.
No, you get a little tiny piece of your screen up there, and you have to keep moving this around to see the screen. So when you blow up the word what, you get WHA on your magnifier. Now you've got to move that magnifier around to see what else belongs there, because there ain't no such word as wah. But by the time you get it where you can see it, you miss the first three letters again. As you move it down the screen, you might pick up the bottom of the H and the top of the R in resilient. Because that's how much of your screen gets magnified. And you're trying to move this thing around with a mouse and actually read the screen. And it's very difficult. Again, that high learning curve that we default to for the normal able-bodied person. It's just like system sounds. You notice all the system sounds got turned off in Linux? You know why they're turned off? The normal able-bodied person doesn't want to hear his computer beep. And it's really simple to turn them back on, right? Unless you're blind. The blind guy can't turn it on. He needs the sound to turn it on because he can't hear anything. But we make sure we default to satisfy that normal able-bodied person. And we do it over and over. And it's kind of frustrating. It really is. Did you have a question? Okay.
The touch group you were talking about,
Yes.
is that the best place to go? What's a good place to go to get started, either if you have disabilities and you're trying to work around them or you're trying to be an advocate of health? Is there a good place to start? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And maybe it's something that somebody needs to form, but I know that you have the tools on the internet too.
I use so many different places, and I don't pay attention to the names.
Mm-hmm.
God, you can't come to our Universal Tux group without an invitation. Anybody wants an invite to it, email me. I will send you the invitation, but we will first check to make sure you're not trolling or spamming anyone else. We had to close the group because of trolls and spam. It's just too difficult. God.
If there isn't such a thing, then maybe...
I don't think there is.
Then maybe I'll...
Do you know of any? No. I don't believe there is a single site. I do recommend people go to my Team Charlie's Angels site, teamcharliesangels.com, because I have a lot of references on there. But that site was built specifically for my support team for the MS. But I don't believe there is any single place where you can get a lot of good information. I spent months and months online tracking stuff down.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't expect one place that would have all the answers by any means, but a place to go start to look. But yeah, okay. Yeah.
If you're using Linux, GNOME's website is probably the best. They have some really good documentation there, and they have some really bad documentation. I don't know, does anyone know if Joan Marie is still working GNOME? Joan Marie was their accessibility person, and she is fantastic. But again, you've got to search the site to find stuff. It's a good site. Okay, I'm done. Turn this